Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I really want to thank the organizers for this very kind invitation to participate in this workshop. And now I have the challenging task to stand between you and your lunch. But I'm going to definitely make the most of it. I have a nice opportunity to kind of reflect a little bit upon what was said in previous presentations. Some very good points already came up, and then I'm going to refer to them definitely. The title of the presentation is Research Indicators for Open Science. I'm going to start talking about open science a bit more broadly from a funding agency's point of view, and tell specifically, as Tommy mentioned in his presentation, that we have implemented some incentives or some ways to enhance open science, so what we have actually done. And then I move towards the research indicators and especially talk a little bit about impact indicators and really kind of more maybe raise some questions than give final answers. But what would it mean if we really had indicators and measuring data citations? What kind of things need to be taken into account? And these are basically the lessons we have learned when applying bibliometric indicators when assessing the state of science in Finland at various levels. So, as mentioned, Academy of Finland is a funding organization. We have 4 research councils and advance the quality and impact of scientific research, renewal of science, and development of research environments. And in our activities, high quality is always the kind of leading thing, high impact and responsible research more and more nowadays, as well as the practical application of research and knowledge and skills it generates. Then the same triangle from an open science perspective. So basically, as a funding agency, we require that academy-funded projects commit to open access publishing, but also at the same time always highlight that first comes the quality in scientific publishing and then open access. So that is the order. We also give funding to projects in making their research data and methods freely available. And the goal is to make research publications, data and material, metadata and methods widely available for further use. Well, the basic thing in open science. And also, I guess it was mentioned maybe in Sara's presentation earlier, that when you follow the principles of open science, of course, you have to take research ethics and the kind of judicial environment into account. There are various degrees of openness, and ranging from fully open to strictly confidential. That's also a possibility in some kind of medical research, for example. And the Academy requires that principal investigators of Academy-funded projects see to that the project's data are stored and made available through major national or international archives or storage services, which are important in their own fields. And we implemented actually the requirement for a data management plan for the first time this September, and from now on it's included in all our calls, so that the data management has to be planned already when applying for competitive funding. As we all know very well, openness is a key principle in science. It produces or promotes the reproduction of scientific results, and openness in practice improves the overall quality and impact of research. And I really like this part because later I'm going to talk a bit more in detail about impact indicators. Open science forms, this is kind of everybody knows this, a principle of good scientific practice, but you cannot kind of highlight this enough. Then a few concrete examples. How have we done this? How have we implemented the open science from a funding agency's point of view? So I already mentioned that there has to be a data management plan where you explain the technical issues, choices, possibilities and limitations for delivering open research data. And kind of from a science point of view also explain these in your research plan. But it's very important that the research organizations and infrastructures really support open access publishing and the delivery throughout the research process. Well then, when the application is submitted comes the evaluation, and these are the concrete questions our international review panels ask. So basically, open science issues are evaluated when the panels look at the quality, overall quality of the research which is proposed, and they look at the same time the ethical issues and then open science. This is not rated like all the other parts when looking at the quality, the feasibility of the research and the research group and their merits. Those are rated, but this is not rated, which I think makes a lot of sense. But the panels are asked to comment on what is the intended level of open access to research results, and is the data management plan worked out in a sufficient way. And one thing I want to highlight is that claiming in the application, if you claim that open, kind of full open access or open research data is as such, it is not an automatic option for the best possible review. So there are many ways to argue this and do it in a way which kind of produce good evaluation. And then when we come to the funding decision, still the key emphasis obviously is on the scientific evaluation, but then the Academy takes into account several science policy objectives, and the promotion of open science is then one of them when making the final funding decision. Okay, then you carry out the research and hopefully make wonderful publications, openly available, store your data, and then comes the time to report to the funder what has happened. Jostein mentioned the accountability issue in your presentation, and showing the impact of public research funding has become increasingly important. We all know this. So, and when I say impact, I mean kind of both the scientific impact and obviously the broader impact in the society. But the following, what I'm going to highlight, is more talking about the scientific impact and how we can measure maybe that, than about the broader impact, which would be a kind of a topic for a completely different presentation or separate presentation. So we have suggested that open science activities, what was presented in the data management and in the applications, that they would be followed up in the final evaluation, the scientific reporting after the funding period. So this is not yet the case, hopefully in the very soon future. At the moment, researchers report the publications they have produced, and we are able to, for example, match the Academy-funded publications to the Web of Science data and make kind of small-scale bibliometric analysis of the scientific impact of Academy-funded research. And if you broaden this up and think that in the future, could we do maybe similar analysis also for data based on data citations, and maybe ask the question that does the data which has been created with, in Finland's case, Academy of Finland funding or other competitive funding, does it have a broader visibility, broader scientific impact than other data produced in Finland? And how does this compare internationally? This is a very interesting question for a funder. but still we are not so far yet, kind of opening the landscape with what there might be in the future. But every time when you talk about bibliometric analysis, the quality of the reported publication data is really of pivotal importance. So it has to be correct, complete, the credit has to go to the right researchers. And I will still come a little bit back to this issue later. So then let's take the path towards analyzing data citations. The first question is that what are we really assessing? Are we assessing activity, scientific impact, collaboration, or quality? Here I would like to say that I see that with these kind of indicators you can kind of assess scientific impact, but really when you want to look at quality, the role of peer review is not going to go away at all, and many of these indicators are more like proxies of impact but not really direct indicators of quality. And indicators, metrics doesn't alone provide a reliable overall picture of the level of research. They kind of add a useful perspective and raise a lot of questions, but they're more of a mean than actually an end. Well then, when you plan a citation analysis, there are several things you need to take into account. And these examples I'm talking more about from a point of view when you assess kind of state of research in a country or in a big organization or in a whole discipline. And I'm not talking about how to assess individual researchers or research groups. So when the aggregate is larger, there comes the issues that let's say a big university is active in several research fields and there are various types of research data produced in different fields, obvious. And there are also disciplinary differences in citation practices. And if this is true when you talk about publications, most likely this is true when you talk about data. So these things really need to be taken into account, otherwise the indicators, the more aggregate indicators, are meaningless. Then the role of citation databases. One of the materials the organizers pointed at used the word citation indexing services. So Thomson Reuters databases, Web of Science, Scopus. These are what I'm talking about now. So one important question is the overall coverage. So if you're looking at the broad unit, university field, how well does it cover different disciplines? We all know that when we are talking about publications, the social sciences, many social sciences, especially humanities, are covered quite poorly in these international citation databases. Then to do any kind of larger scale analysis, you really need to be able to do automated tracking of data outputs. And Sarah mentioned the importance of DOIs, unique identifiers, and still, so as I said earlier, credit must be assigned correctly to the researchers who actually produce the data output. But even though you have DOIs and all that in place, there still might be a need for data cleaning, especially when you are doing organization or department level analysis. This is very true in bibliometrics. Web of Science, for example, has mistakes and organization names are written in several different ways. So if you just press the button and think that the numbers are going to come out easily, it won't work that way. Then, if you are trying to measure impact across disciplines, it's very important to take it into account that the citation practices vary and normalize the indicators by research field. Also, to make the indicators meaningful, you kind of need to compare them to the international level. How are things on average in this field? What is a lot and what is a little? We often remove, in bibliometric analysis, self-citations when we are analyzing scientific impact. Not that they wouldn't be important, but especially when you focus on impact, you kind of want to measure the impact on other researchers' work. And then comes the issue of counting methods, whether you count so-called based on whole counting every, for example, a collaborative publication or collaborative data set from researchers from 3 countries, whether all countries get equal 111 point or shared 1/3 of the point. Researchers have suggested, bibliometric researchers, that the fractional counting method leads to the most proper field normalization, and that is why that should be implemented when you are assessing impact. All this kind of highlights the importance of methodological research on research indicators. So the world is not yet ready, and also this kind of really groundwork still needs to be done. So finally, I want to conclude by saying the same I said in the beginning, that openness really improves the overall quality and impact of research at its best. When you talk about indicators, disciplinary differences need to be acknowledged, and when designing and applying research indicators, the methodological research on indicators is needed. And last but by no means least, responsible use of research indicators is super important. Metrics always has its limitations, and they need to be acknowledged and taken into account when you interpret the results and also draw conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, where is the mic? Okay, so questions to Anu about indicators for research quality assessment. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Have you made any experiment in Thomson Reuters Web of Science about finding data sets there? Have you tried?
Well, like really small experiments, but not really from an indicator point of view, no, not yet.
Yeah, because I would be interested, because our metadata is harvested there, so there should be some social science data. And, well, we have tried some time, but I'm not sure how well it's, or easily it's found from there, if you are looking for the data.
Something else? Okay. Well, I should have 2 mics really. So, but here we are.
It's good for your exercise. As we are all aware, there are these indicators developed in X places where X is a very big number. And my question is do you see any convergence on this? Because I'm a bit worried that these indicators, which slightly differ in different countries, the European Commission is developing their own. I'm a bit worried where we end up with this. Do you see any convergence in this? Because we need to come to some, I think at least, to some kind of unified indicators at some stage, because this process now is a bit uncontrolled, if I may say that.
Well, I guess there is no, or I don't know, of a golden standard list of indicators, but there are some best practices in terms of how the indicators, even if they had some minor differences, that what are the really basics. One of them is normalizing, and this thing of taking the disciplinary differences into account and these kind of issues. So those golden standards or standards have been published and are talked about. And then also, I know it's kind of a wild jungle where it feels that everybody measures kind of similar things in different ways, but then at least on a country level, when you kind of compare the results, many of them are quite similar. So that is also one way to see what is good and what is not. But then unfortunately there's also kind of a wild use of indicators, and that's why I wanted to highlight the responsible use, especially in decision making and when making the conclusions, that how long-arching conclusions can you actually make.
Okay. Yeah. So I would actually again like to ask one question. So the academy is still, as we all or everyone is, somehow pretty much in the mode of kind of assessing the publication quality. I mean the basic unit of scientific production, it's a publication, and then you kind of follow the publication citations and whatnot, and then the kind of the indicators reflect this. So now there is this more and more, the data is becoming more and more significant, and so do you see any challenges currently in kind of assessing the quality of kind of the really data work, the data sets, or the kind of the work that is being done with in this compiling the data and I mean if you wanted to assess the quality of data, so what would you like to see to emerge? I mean because now currently there are not established ways to. I mean there are no data citations, and there is no kind of no things to measure to kind of assess the quality of data. How good was this data? How do you know? I mean, Sanna puts forth a bunch of data and says this is brilliant data. So how do you assess that? And what would you kind of wish to somehow see to be able to assess that kind of this? Put the same indicators on data rather than publications.
Well, I guess so. The one question is really what are the challenges of assessing the quality of data in peer review? So that is one, and then the funding. So and even there, we are kind of in a way in an early phases that now it's highlighted more in the evaluation forms and evaluation guidelines, and we get more experience that. Then somehow I feel that the order is still that a funder can promote open science in general and making data available openly, and then the indicator development kind of comes next. So not to go like first indicators and then the actions, but first the actions and then the indicators. But of course, as you in many of the presentations highlighted, that also the measuring kind of can be an incentive to do it better and do it more, and that's
I was kind of asking, I mean, what would you want to see? I mean, so that you could measure quality of data.
I guess what we really would like to see is as many data sets openly available as possible, and that kind of be integrated into the research process.
Okay, so let's thank Anna once again. Oh, there are more questions.
I have a comment. Okay.
Because there was my name.
Yes.
Even though it was an accident. Anyhow, so I was thinking about the comment to Pekka's question. I think that what should be seen there is the reuse of the data.
Sorry,
the reuse of the data. So this is one of the things that why we are opening the data and putting the efforts on the data sets, that they are used in other purposes. So I think that in this kind of indicators and this kind of analysis, one of the major issues that there should be indicators to really to show that this data set is reused in some other occasions. So that would be something that I'm kind of considering. And also the interdisciplinarity, in a way, that how this is connected to other sciences. Is this data set valuable for the other science fields? So this kind of question I would start asking when making this analysis.
I don't know what Andy is going to talk about later on, but there is the RDA working group on the data citation, which is in the production stage, where I understand some of the big publishers like Nature, I think Elsevier, Springer, are involved in, and they must have created some kind of criteria, system for this. So this is a bit of a sales pitch, but please have a look at the output from the data citation working group at RDA.
Okay, this may be a good sales pitch also to come back. Okay. So this was good promotion also to come back from lunch here, because we will hear from Andy right after or Andreas Rauber, sorry, right after the lunch about kind of the RDA working group and the recommendations and the work that goes in that direction. But so now we have lunch.